I'm Zan Bradford. You're watching My Community, and we'll be right back.
It is your weekly program that has always been concerned with the virtual gathering, that is, the gathering that occurs on air and online. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. As always, thanks for your time. A very warm welcome to all of our viewers, especially those joining us via the World Wide Web, including Vincent Wilkie, his family, relatives and friends in the UK. In last week's program, Judy Haynes Hamilton presented Fix Village as she knew it then. This week we have moved inland and taken up position on higher ground. Here, a well-known Barbadian educator who has dedicated her life to serving others and whose life is now a shining example of that recommitment to the Barbadian values that have made us who we are. She now joins us as this week's community presenter.
Greenwich Village, a quaint district with about 95 houses. It's divided in two by the road which runs east to west from the Lancaster roundabout on the ABC highway to Trent's in Old Town. It was originally called Morgan, associated with the plantation to the east, but the name has now evolved to Greenwich Village because of the owners of Greenwich House at the west of the district. Most persons who live here and they're giving you a landmark to find us would tell you, come up Trent's Hill, and when you see Greenwich House, the name was written on the wall, you know that you are in the right place. So the two sides of the village divided by the road, the divisions continued into church because some of the people go to the church in Old Town, some people go right to the Anglican church, and some people go left to the Methodist church. This division is serious. Some attended the Old Town Methodist and some attended St. James Parish Church. The same with the schools. Some of us went to Old Town, St. James Primary School, and others from the same district went to St. Silas Primary. So the division continued.
As you will hear throughout this program, Greenwich is a fine example of a united Barbadian community.
Everyone in the village went to church. And there's only one church, the Pentecostal church here. And even if you went to the Anglican or the Methodist, everybody went to the Pentecost church as well, the night services, because it was right in the village. And then we had vacation Bible schools and the summer camps, Easter and Christmas and in the summer. So it was church. We grew up in this village going to church 3 times on a Sunday. You went to morning church, Sunday school at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you went back to church in the evening. So we got a large dose of God. And that physical exercise combined with the spiritual exercise, we had to walk to Old Town. There were only 3 cars in Morgan at that time, and so we got together in groups and we walked. We walked and we talked, and I remember running a pole and walking a pole, the electric poles. Run from one pole to the next, then you walked the next pole, then you ran the next pole and you walked the next pole. So you understand, running down Trent's Hill in the morning and running up Trent's Hill in the evening, most of us were usually fit.
All of our traditional communities were built on agriculture. Our folks knew the importance of tilling the land, growing what they needed to eat, and sharing with others.
Some people also had land over the gully. So to get to work your land, you had to go down the gully hill and up the gully hill. And over there they had all the ground provisions planted, and as well as the fruit trees, the mangoes and the akis and the donks and so. So when we were on vacation during the summer or on Saturdays, because on Saturdays you had to go in the gully to pick up wood. There was no electricity at that time and you cooked on wood fire. So on Saturdays you had to go in the gully and pick up wood, and you went over the gully and you were able to harvest the fruit. It was not against the law at that time. you could just go in a tree and pick some mangoes and pick some akis and pick some donks. So our snacks were not from a plastic bag. They were straight from the tree. And even the bird picked mangoes and the bird picked apples were the sweeter of the two. So we would walk over the gully to reap, and you also had to go over the gully hill to help reap the canes when it was crop time. You were able to go over with your parents and your neighbors, and you were able to put the canes on the band and tie up the bands, and they would lift up this bundle of cane on your head, and you would walk up to the truck on the ladder until the truck was full. And that money went to assist with your school things. So you were working, making a contribution. You were learning how to make a valuable contribution towards your own upkeep and the upkeep of your family. And over the gully, they had lots of grass. So you would cut grass, you would go over the gully, you would work with the cane, and on your way back, you had to come home with a bundle of grass for the cows or the sheep to put under the pen. So children were not just playing and having fun. We worked, but we made the work fun. Many people in the district also kept animals. So they worked over the gully, and at home they had animals. Most houses had pigs and sheep and goat and fowls and ducks and so on. So we were in the habit daily of helping out with the animals. Before you went to school, you had to take care of the animals. We had to wash down the pig pens. You had to go to one standpipe in the village. Everybody congregated at that standpipe so that you got your bucket of water, and you had to wait your turn. So you had to be patient. So you would come home and fill up a barrel, and from that you would water your kitchen garden and you would water your animals, and you did that on a daily basis. So there was never a dull moment. I did not know that word bored until I became an adult, because there was always so much for us to do. And we didn't only participate in raising the animals, but when it was time for them to be killed, we had an exercise in entrepreneurship, because we had to go from house to house, engage the pork, engage the beef, engage the mutton. So, you know, Mr. Allen wanted 4 pounds and it was being sold at $1.50 a pound. You had to work out how much that costs. And then when you delivered the meat to Mr. Allen, he then had to pay you the money, and you had to make sure it was correct. So it was a practical exercise in mathematics. And there was one butcher in the village, Mr. Sandyford. He was the butcher. He would come around early the Saturday morning before you woke up. They would put on a big barrel with hot water, and they would slaughter the animals. Then the children got involved in distributing the meat from the animals. The abattoir has stopped all of that now. We have different health standards, so none of that will happen in the village anymore.
But the lessons are precious, and as you have heard, they have benefited greatly from the many exercises and were able to apply them in other areas of their lives. And in Marcia's case, she was able to impart these lessons to the lives of hundreds of children who passed through her hands during those many, many years of teaching in Barbados.
We also ate from the land, the ground provisions, the yams and the potatoes and the eddos and so that we planted. And I suppose that's why people were so healthy, because many of our villagers lived past 80, past 90. We had a lot of long livers in the district. There was always an abundance of food. People shared the ground provisions raw, and because the families lived in clusters, you would get 4 or 5 houses that belonged to the same, like the Cumberbatch family or the Allen family. They lived in close proximity, so you could go to one back door into the other one's front door. So they shared the raw ground provisions, and they also shared whatever they cooked. The rice and the soup and the cuckoo and so on. So there was always an abundance of food. Children in our district never went to sleep hungry, because people shared what they had. And we played in groups. We played in the road. There wasn't a pasture here except you went over the gully hill. But we played in the road. We played the pickups and the jacks and the hopscotch and the catchers. And we also interacted with persons from Westmoreland and Orange Hill and Seaview and Old Town, because on the north side of the district there was a gully that had a cricket pitch. And this side of the gully was the pavilion. So we sat on the side of the gully whilst the guys played in the bottom. And it was great fun, great competition. And you would be out there in the sun getting a really good tan and eating fruit, because in the gully out there were lots of guava trees and there were donks and so on. So we didn't have to worry about the non-communicable diseases then, because we feasted on the fruit from the land. And of course, by the time the sun started to set, it was time to go home, because there were no street lights then, and we used the sun as our barometer. So you would look and see that the sun is going down below the horizon, and everybody knew that was time to pack up and go home. Minding your language as well, because the adults and the children interacted together. When we were watching cricket, everybody was there. So you had to mind what you said, the words that you use. There was a lot of respect for our elders, and there was quite a lot of discipline as well. So we were always kept in line, so to speak. Education was always important for Greenwich Village. Even though in the early days up to about the 1970s, there was no electricity, we still produce citizens of excellence. Some of whom included the late Dr. Reverend Sion Goodrich, who was principal of Codrington College in the 1970s, and he became the Bishop of the Windward Islands in the 1990s from Greenwich Village. Canon Eric Payne, who was the rector of St. John's Parish Church. He is also from Greenwich Village. Goldman Cyrus was one of the first speed cops, and he kept drivers within the speed limit. I remember as a child how huge that motorcycle that he rode looked to me. And I am told that no one could get away from him. You would pass him in Old Town and say good morning to Mr. Cyrus, and by the time you got up to St. Thomas Parish Church, he was already up there, and nobody knew which road did he take. So he was nicknamed the Phantom, because they said that he could move so quickly all over the place. We also had another story about him, that he reported his mother for selling avocado pears without a license. You know, you need to get a license to sell from your house. Well, she had a pear tree in the backyard. It had lots of pears on it, and she was selling the pears to the neighbors, but she didn't have a license. And he came home and saw her doing that, and he reported her, wrote her up in his little black book. And I am told that she had to go to court too, and that he paid the fine. But he wanted to teach not only her, but the whole village a lesson that you must keep the law.
You're watching My Community, and we'll be right back.
Mr. Brown, the ombudsman, was from this district. His brother, Eustace, was the education officer for mathematics in the Ministry of Education, and he was also the organist at St. Silas Church. He gave back to Barbados, gave back to Greenwich Village by tutoring our students. He prepared them for the common entrance examination, and it was at no cost. So thanks to you for giving back to Greenwich. We also produced two principals, Mr. Louis Payne. He was principal at St. Clement School in St. Lucie, and his wife, who was principal at the Wilkie Cumberbatch School. They didn't have any children of their own, but they had two adopted daughters, and they would allow and encourage the children from the district to come to their home to play with their children, and they would also teach us how to sit to the table and to practice the dining etiquette, how to use the knife and fork. and how do you speak at the table, and how do you drink from the glass. And I remember going to their home, and you had to speak standard English. So they set the standard. They said, you can come, but this is the standard that must be kept. And so Mr. Payne passed away this year, 2020. His wife, Mrs. Payne, is still alive, and we want to thank them for the input that they made to our lives in this district. Ralph Boyce was the Chief Education Officer in the Ministry of Education, and he was also the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Agriculture from this district. Clive Walters was a tutor at Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute. His brother, Dr. Walters, Wilbert Walters, he too, a teacher, gave back to our district by conducting classes at the St. James Parish Church Mini Education Center, and children were free to attend his classes without having to pay, and he made sure that they were prepared well for whatever exams they were taking.
Now, this program celebrates the good deeds of community members, those who did their part to ensure that the younger ones were shown the way and guided. Speaking about providing guidance, Marcia Graham celebrates the work of Mr. Boyce.
George St. Clair Boyce, an entrepreneur, he was instrumental in training and employing many young men from Greenwich Village. He had a wrought iron business, and he would take the boys on and teach them how to make the wrought iron. He did furniture and all the burglar bars and grills and so on. And the ones who were keen and interested, some of them worked with him for a number of years, but then there were others of them whom he facilitated them to open their own businesses. And he would say to me, you know, the more you give, the more you get. The more you share, the more you get back. So when I teach them how to do wrought iron, it's the same business that I am doing, and they move out and start their own business. That's a really good thing, because the universe has more than enough for all of us. And that has stuck with me. The universe produces more than enough for all of us. And so the more you give, the more you will get back. And I saw that in a practical way in our district, Greenwich Village. And so thanks Mr. Boyce, for those young men that you took off the street, some of them who had already got into trouble with the police. You took them, I mean, you were really firm with them. Sometimes your language was strong and would make you tremble, but they turned out to be citizens of excellence in our district of Greenwich.
In addition to Mr. Boyce, there was a number of nurses in the community who took seriously their oath and were the first responders when community members needed health care. Marcia Graham celebrates these ladies, and naturally she leads us directly to the story of the community's midwife.
Estherline Cummins, who is now retired, Esther Aline, Janet Blackett, Sherry Rollins, and Nurse Jean Brownwall became the assistant matron acting at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. All of them are citizens of excellence who grew up in this district and whom we are really proud of. Sherry Rollins is currently a nurse still and doing well. You could call on them at any time. If something went wrong with the child, you could call the nurse. If it was something that meant going to the hospital, the nurse would come and she would facilitate you getting your child to the hospital or to the clinic. But as long as you lived in this district and you called on the nurse, they were helpers, they helped you, they still do, and we are thankful about that. Before there was this improved health system, we had the district midwife. Nurse Cummins was a midwife, but before this health system now, we had the district midwife. She worked at the Lancaster plantation, and I'm told that she would walk to work with her scissors in her pocket when she knew that a woman was due. And so when she was called to say, come, this woman is in labor, she already had her tools in her pocket, so she didn't have to waste time to go home. So she would come to the house, they would boil a pot of water, and the next thing you knew, you would hear a baby crying. She prided herself on so many of the persons in this district. She would say, I helped bring you in the world, and I helped bring you in the world. Listen, you have to help me now because I helped bring you in the world. So Miss Clara was a district midwife before we had this better health system. We also produced tradesmen. We had first-class masons in Ori and Moneyman, that's their nicknames, but they were the first-class masons in the district. Carpenters, Mr. King and Mr. Drayton. We had the plumbers, Graydon and Archie. Those are the persons who grew up in the district, who became skilled as adults, and who in turn worked for almost everybody who lived in our district. Journalists were produced from Greenwich Village as well. Our Geraldine Edwards was born in Greenwich, and Roy Morris, who is now the press secretary to the Prime Minister, he also is from Greenwich Village. So we have produced some sound persons over the years. The creative designers were also produced here. Darrell Maynard and Clifton Hope, they were tailors, so they would sew the suits and the pants and so for the men. They also took young men and taught them how to do tailoring. And then this was big business, dressmaking. In those days, people would buy fabric and get clothes made. So our seamstress in Greenwich was Miss Ursula Bishop. She lived to be over 100 years old, and she worked up until she died. That machine was her life. She tutored young ladies to help them to understand how to sew and to design. And she used to turn out first-class brides. When Miss Ursula was making for a bride on a Saturday, the whole district stopped and congregated on her gap to watch the wedding, to see the bride, to comment on the bridesmaids and the flower girls and the mother of the bride and so on. But she did fabulous work. And in turn, she trained other people to do really good work as well. I know that right now Monica Yearwood is working on school clothes. Right now, and making tons of masks. She was one of Miss Ursula's students a long time ago. Every morning you would go and she would have your work ready for you and you would work all day. So we produced all of that from this little Greenwich Village.
We could not speak about the good work here in this community without celebrating the work of Mr. Headley and his donkey cart.
He worked for MTW. He would take up the stuff along the road. Sometimes now when I see the grass all piled up for weeks and the traffic running over it and it's going back into the road, I remember Mr. Headley. Mr. Headley walked behind the campaigners, and whenever they weeded the grass, he would take it up. So at the end of the evening, whatever the campaigners had, whatever they weed, he had taken up with his donkey cart, and he had taken it and dropped it somewhere. And then when we were coming home from school at 3 o'clock, we would get a drop in that donkey cart up Trent's Hill, because you can understand coming up Trent's Hill in the 3 o'clock sun was always a task.
What about shopping for groceries? Where did community members shop?
And we didn't have to go a long way to shop. Everybody goes to the supermarket and to town and down Spikestown and so on these days. But in those days, we shopped at the village shops. We had Miss Holder's shop, Miss Rainey, she had a shop there, and Miss Douglin, where you would go, your parents would write the list, and you would go to the shop and the shopkeeper would put up the goods. And I always was fascinated by how they would wrap up 2 pounds of flour in brown paper or gray paper, and they would fold the top and then fold the corners, fold them under, and not a grain of sugar would come out. And that was a real skill. And then I was always also fascinated by how they used to add up 6 and 5 are 11 and 9 are 20 and 6 are 26. I mean, quickly, without a calculator, no calculators in those days, and they were able to add. So it was always a lesson in mathematics. So when you went to the shop, your mental arithmetic improved because you had to add along with the shopkeeper. That was an exercise that was understood. And so we learned to add quickly and correctly by going to the shop.
You're watching My Community, and we'll be right back.
Speaking about shops, what about other shops or locations in the community where the gentlemen would meet to have a libation?
Like every district, we also had a rum shop. The rum shop was always open. I mean, from early in the morning, some of those old men used to be drinking rum. And I know that we have comments now about drinking and driving, but in those days it was drinking and walking, because they would go to the rum shop and some of them would get so drunk they couldn't walk home. So it was the job of the younger men to make sure that they got home safely and that their wife opened the door and that they would put them inside on the mat on the front house floor so they could thaw out and wake up to go to work next morning. And you know, it was amazing that some of those men worked hard, carpenters and masons, and going to work well during the week. But come Friday evening, they were in the rum shop and they would be drunk Friday and Saturday and Sunday. But on a Sunday, the music in the rum shop turned to gospel music, religious music. So you would hear the Chuck Wagon Gang, and you would hear Skeeter Davis and Jim Reeves and Joseph Knowles. And those men used to sing, because they were also the Cambridge College Choir that sang the Anglican hymns. And because many of them had grown up in the church, they knew the sol fa for the hymns. So they would sing the alto and the soprano and the bass. And the rum shop would be alive with the songs and the hymns and the spiritual psalms. And the psalms, you know, the psalms with the descants, you would hear the men in the rum shop singing that. So Sunday was a religious day, even if the rest of the week they didn't bother too much with it. And in the rum shop, the older men, it was like intergenerational. The older men had their conversations at times. The younger men was in a different part of the shop. But then there were times when the older ones were sort of tutors, helping the younger men to understand what they should do, how they should grow up, and how they should live in order to become effective men in their communities.
The values, norms, and belief system of a community that made us better people. This is who we are. Special thank you to Marcia Graham for guiding us through her community. I'm Sherwood McCaskey. Until next week at the same time, it's goodbye for now.